Welcome, welcome. So, this is another segment of the Fulfillment Focus podcast, and I am so jazzed to be interviewing Charles Jones. Charles, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Maurice.
So, what we focus on in this segment, it's really about life fulfillment. And that's a pretty big topic, and it's absolutely perfect for your body of work because when I think of what we're going to be spending our time talking about today, I would break it down, and I've been through your training, so I'm going to simplify it in this way. I would say if you've ever been in a situation where the way you responded to your life event um, was not the way that you wish you had responded, and or did not put you into, a better situation, into meeting your needs in a higher order way. This gap, I'm going to call it the gap in between, right? The gap in between are stimulus and response, that we all go through in so many times in a day as leaders, as coaches, and as individuals just responding to our everyday environment. You, Charles Jones, and your body of work has taken this gap of emotional response and broken it down with such precision. I just have such a high appreciation for how you've done that and to the level of efficacy and effectiveness it has in helping people respond in ways that are just going to make their life better. So that's what we're going to decouple today in our conversation. And I just really, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you for your body of work, for going down into the dredges and seeing this need in the world and having the fortitude to say, I'm gonna actually create a program to teach this and make it available in the world. So just really thank you.
You're welcome, Maurice, and thanks for the opportunity to share my body of work with your folks on the Fulfillment Podcast.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. Well, okay, so my first question, I guess, as we get into this gap, I'm going to say when people are responding, I'm going to say mostly in the world. It's been my experience that I'm going to use like most people are responding to situations in the world. How are they responding today in your experience compared to how they could be responding? And why has that been important enough for you to actually be part of the opportunity?
Um, so in studies I've done at organizations, um, mostly large for-profit organizations, but some government agencies and some nonprofits. Um, there are two stereotypical ways that people respond to a challenging situation, right? And that challenging situation could be something as simple as an employee not delivering something on time. It could be not hitting the sales numbers that were expected. Uh, it can be some change in the regulatory environment, any number of things, a competitive threat. And people, and I generally mostly work with leaders, they will either respond with a sort of blame and complaint kind of a mindset, right? They'll, um, something bad's happening, uh, negative emotions are arising. They think they feel bad because of what's happening out there in the world, and they complain about what's happening in the world and they look for someone or something to blame for their situation. Okay. And so I call that a state of emotional victimhood.
Mhm.
And the other state is I call emotional responsibility. And in this state, people just immediately go into kind of a solve and evolve mindset, right? Something happens, the same negative emotions appear as for this person, but in their case, they immediately recognize that those emotions aren't coming from their environment. They're coming from their own subconscious needs. And in the presence of what's happening in the environment, they're not on track to meet some of their needs. And those needs are generating negative emotions to get the attention of the conscious mind and say, hey, need your help. Can you turn your attention inward to those needs and figure out how we're going to get back on track to meet those needs, or alternatively, change or drop the needs? And what determines whether a given person in a given situation will go into the emotional victimhood view or the emotional responsibility view has a lot to do with how they've been raised, what's been modeled for them. I believe that this interpreting our emotions in terms of the needs that are generating them, that's innate to us. We were all sort of born that way. But over time, we've been conditioned into believing that our emotions are a function of what's happening to us. We may have heard a parent say, you made mommy angry. I resent the way they're treating me. This person
Mhm.
at work, they're so frustrating to work with. I feel guilty about what I did. All of those statements presume that the emotion is arising in response to something that happened in the past, is happening now, or potentially could happen in the future. Like, I'm so worried about what might happen. When in fact, that's not the reason that we're experiencing those emotions. We're experiencing the emotions because we have this incredibly intelligent supercomputer, this chat GPT in our subconscious, which is just analyzing everything that happens and teasing out the implications for how easy or difficult it's going to be for us to meet our needs with the current strategies and resources and stuff that we have in place. So these negative emotions are calling on us to solve and evolve. And if we recognize that, we learn more quickly, we perform better, and as we begin to interpret our emotions that way, we interpret other people's emotions that way, and we become much more empathetic and compassionate toward them for the needs that they're struggling to meet.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you. So beautifully said. I want to dive into um, a few of the things with a clarification question as well. So to move from blame and shame to solve and evolve. And you're saying that there's a very specific reason why people fall into victimhood. Um, Now, I really like you said instead of, so if you were to finish the sentence, instead of happening to in the blame and shame, what would it be instead of in the solve and involve? Like this is happening to me versus what? Do you
So
understand?
I think when someone's in the blame and complain mode, then they adamantly believe, I feel bad because something bad is happening.
Right?
Okay. So
Mhm.
they are attributing their emotions to what's happening, or in a more kind of new agey way of viewing it, they're attributing their emotions to the narrative or the story they're telling themselves about what's happening. And that's actually no better. In fact, it can create some delusion on the part of the person that's practicing that. Um, so to shift from that, to catch yourself in, oh, I really am seeing myself as a victim of my thoughts or my emotions or my circumstances, to, well, wait a second, no, uh, my frustration is telling me something. My anger is telling me something. My anxiety is telling me something. What is it telling me? Well, in the case of frustration, it's telling you you're not on track to achieve a goal.
Mhm.
In the case of anxiety, it's telling you you're not on track to mitigate a risk. In terms of anger, it's telling you I'm not on track to assert a right. And the moment you recognize that, then the conscious mind can reflect on that need. Oh,
Mhm.
frustrated. What goal am I trying to achieve? Oh, okay. Now that I understand what goal I'm trying to achieve, I understand why my coworker telling me they can't get me the data today, why I felt frustrated right after that. It's because my subconscious figured out, oh, well, we were counting on getting the data today to work on the report this afternoon so we could turn it in tomorrow morning to our boss. And now that plan is no longer going to work if I can't get my that data from my employee. Okay, what are my options for achieving my goal to deliver my report on time? Well, is there another employee I could ask for that data? Could I go into the information system and get the data myself?
Hmm.
Could I renegotiate with my boss to have more time to complete the report, or perhaps leave that one section out because it's just not crucial for the meeting we're having tomorrow, right? All these creative ideas, all these other options begin to appear for me the moment I'm thinking, I'm responding to my frustration as how do I get back on track to achieve this goal? If, on the other hand, I think the reason I'm frustrated because my coworker didn't get me the data on time, I am spinning in, what could be more important than my data? Why doesn't she cooperate with me? This is the third time this has happened. Um, just lots of judgment,
Hmm.
right? So whenever you're experiencing judgment or negativity, it's a sure sign that you are misinterpreting what your emotions are telling you. You're interpreting your emotions in terms of what's happening out there or the story you're telling yourself in here. And what you want to do is get yourself over to what need am I trying to meet in the situation
Hmm.
and what would be a more effective approach for meeting that need. And if I don't see one, I may need to adjust my need. I may
Hmm.
even need to, you know what? This goal's not that important. I'm going to drop it. So, so much of what we as coaches tend to deal with is when our clients come to us and they express a struggle. Almost always there's a certain amount of emotional distress.
Hmm.
And so if we can actually use those emotions as trailheads, guideposts
Mm.
to help our clients understand what needs are at stake for them in that situation and bring it into conscious awareness so it could potentially be changed. Because the
Mm.
subconscious can't change its programming on its own. But if you surface it, like super simple example, if it's 3 o'clock, I start noticing that I have been my shoulder blades have I've tightened up between the shoulder blades. Okay, what's going on there? Oh, I am tensing those muscles so I don't feel anxious. But anxiety is trying to get my attention. Okay, if I relax into my body, I allow myself to feel how anxious I am. Oh, what if I don't get everything on my to-do list done by 5 o'clock? What happens then? Do I stay at work and finish it? Do I not finish it and go to my kid's soccer game? Like this anxiety, this what if is starting there, right? Rather than suppress it and suffer the stress that I'm creating for myself by doing that. Let me take a look. Well, what if that happens? What would I do in that case? Well, if I don't get it done in time, the truth is some of these things on my to-do list, it's an artificial deadline. All this stuff, if it's done by noon tomorrow, I'm good. So, if it's 4:45 and I'm not going to get everything done, I'm just going to leave work, go to my kid's soccer game, make sure I'm there on time. That's going to be my plan. My subconscious hears me, believes in this in my contingency plan. And it's like, okay, we're going to be okay. And now I get to go back to work and I have my full mental bandwidth available to me to work on those tasks because the section that was previously occupied by tensing up my body so I didn't feel anxious, by tied up suppressing my anxiety, it's now available for me to do the tasks with, right? And then I arrive to my kid's soccer game in a way better mood.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that example. This is the way I'm framing it as you're speaking. tell me if I'm on track then. So, in one response, if you're in victimhood, you are responding to an event and uh, saying it, this is happening to me. And there's like a temporal state to that. Like it's already happened to me. I'm picking up like this has happened to me versus when you're able to be in emotional responsibility, instead of happening to, it's like it feels like speaking up for, where it's like this need has arisen and it's calling on it to have like a voice. And what you're describing is to give that need its voice. And a lot of the times, I think we haven't been taught how to really recognize that. We haven't been like,
Yeah.
when you're in victimhood, which we've been probably taught and modeled and see a lot more, then we're responding to this event in a way that isn't really meeting that need. It's just giving it temporary relief versus what you're talking about feels way more complete, like way more empowered. Um, yeah, is there any part of what I'm describing? Am I on track? Where am I veering off?
But so a key part of my discovery, so I'm a behavioral scientist,
Yeah.
and a key part of my discovery is that, we have two minds, or we have two cognitive systems, right? We've got the conscious mind, which is rational,
Yeah.
sequential, and can only process about 45 pieces of information per second. And then we have our subconscious, which can process about 11 million pieces per second, right? So it's doing all the heavy lifting.
Mm.
And it's organized into about 40 of these subconscious needs. I've talked about achieve goals,
Mhm.
mitigate risks, assert rights. There's maintaining realistic expectations. There's upholding your ethics. There's enforcing your boundaries. There's prioritizing your needs, on and on and on. Okay. And they're all operating in parallel.
Mm.
So I find it useful to think of the two metaphors I like are I'm the chief of a village, and it
Mhm.
takes a village to be a human, right? And my job is the job of each of these needs is to fulfill themselves.
Mhm.
My job is to help a need out when it's struggling using
Mhm.
my rational thinking skills, or when two of my needs they have strategies for fulfilling themselves that are in conflict, it's up to me to sort of resolve that conflict.
Right.
And so I'm, yes, I'm the chief, but they're doing all the work. So we have, um, and they're sort of mine to care for. It's up to me to care for these needs.
Mhm.
And if I use the word I'm often referring to my conscious mind. But if I use the word me or myself, I'm usually referring to my subconscious, right? So self-care is taking exquisite care of these needs, which means the moment they start sending a distress call in the form of a negative emotion,
Mhm.
I want to be there right away for them. I want to hear what they have to say to understand what that need is. And first and foremost, say, hey, I got you.
Mhm.
We're going to figure this out, right? I'm going to find a way to resolve your dilemma, right? And as soon as I do, it actually starts to calm down and I can be completely composed.
Mhm.
When I lead people through some of these techniques, it's not uncommon for someone to say, wow, I am really angry. I am just as angry as when we started this conversation, Charles, but I'm not distressed. I don't know that I've ever felt the anger without the distress. I'm totally composed. There's no chance I'm going to lose it,
Mhm.
but I'm determined to assert my right with this person in this situation. So can you support me in coming up with a plan for how I'm going to do that? So we'll work a little bit, they'll
Hmm.
come up with a plan, and as soon as their subconscious believes the plan is going to work, the next surprising thing they say to me is like, Charles, I don't feel angry anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I feel empowered. Like I'm in this positive emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met the need, but I'm on track to meet the need,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Maybe one that's a little closer to kind of day-to-day workplace. You realize you're frustrated, you figure out what goal you're not on track to achieve. You get yourself on track to achieve the goal, and you shift from feeling frustrated to feeling productive,
Right.
right? So I've developed a body of work to train people to recognize negative emotions as soon as they appear, correctly name them, because you need to know which one it is to understand what the underlying need is.
Mm-hmm.
Decode that emotion into the underlying need, and then have a dialogue between the conscious mind and the need until the need is confident it's back on track to meet itself, or you've adjusted or dropped the need in some way. So it doesn't have to fulfill itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then I've been a good chief, village chief.
Mm-hmm.
When I teach this in organizations, I'll typically use the metaphor of, you know, the CEO and their direct reports,
Mm-hmm.
team leader and the direct reports. And
Mm-hmm.
but it's a very loving relationship between the conscious mind and the subconscious. You're not fighting against your subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're working with your subconscious. And, kind of adjacent to this is some people will tell you about their inner critic and about how much suffering they experience, their inner critic. Well, that inner critic is simply these needs generating negative emotions which are being mistranslated.
Mm-hmm.
They're being mistranslated uh, by that individual. And so they start to hear this really harsh voice against themselves, right? And sometimes against other people or both,
Mm-hmm.
right? But when you're connected, when the conscious mind is connected to the underlying needs, there's a softness, there's a gentleness with oneself, there's a gentleness with others, right? And so I refer to this state where the conscious mind is accurately interpreting what the emotions arising from the subconscious are trying to tell them as being heart connected. The mind is connected to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're connected to your own heart and you're recognizing your emotions as just being ambassadors of your needs, you'll tend to see other people that way too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a much more easeful and effective place to come from to keep your mind connected to the needs in your heart that are requesting its attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now this feels like complicated stuff, like, okay, you've figured this out. It feels really, really complex. It feels like kind of like, I don't want to say beyond access, but like, how long am I going to have to study for this? And am I going to need a coach in order to be able to grab some of these principles and change a fundamental way from how my system might currently be responding to respond in a better way? So even if I recognized it and if I was motivated to change it, it feels like pretty complex and heavy and a lot of work. Now, that's a bit of a leading question because I've been through your stuff, so I think it's important to unpack. Like, so that's why I ask it, right? It's like it feels not accessible and too much work. What do you say to that?
So when I start working with a client, when I start working with a client that wants to be coached in this stuff, Or they may not say, hey, I want to be coached in this stuff. They're just bringing to me, they want some support for an interpersonal issue that they're dealing with, or some major life decisions, some conflict, in any number of places. And since I'm kind of peering through this lens of, okay, my assumption is that what we are as human beings, one way to look at us as human beings is we're all just trying to meet our needs in
Mhm.
harmony with our values. No one's going to meet all their needs all the time. That's
Mhm.
why we have values. That's why we make trade-offs, right? And what trade-offs we make at home will be different than the trade-offs we make at work, than in our community, etc. Um, so I'm looking from that perspective. So no matter how nasty the judgments they're expressing, no matter how bad the behavior, I'm looking for what are the needs that they're attempting to meet here.
Mhm.
And if they have a judgment, I know that they're disconnected from that need. Whenever
Mhm.
you're judgmental, it's because you're not owning a need that you have. If they're behaving badly in a maladaptive way, in a way that's going to be counterproductive for them, it's because they have misinterpreted what that emotion is telling them. No, your anger is not telling you to punch the other person out, right? It's telling you that your subconscious thinks you have a right in the situation and you're not asserting it effectively with the other person.
Mm.
Okay. And that starts some metacognition, some self-reflection. Well, rights are social agreements. Would the other person agree I have this right? I'm not sure they would. Maybe I need to have a conversation to establish that I have this right. I told them to do this as soon as possible. It's 2 days later, they haven't done it. Do I have the right to hold them accountable? I don't think so because I wasn't clear about when I needed it by. As soon as possible to me meant later that day. Maybe
Mhm.
as soon as possible for them means after they finish the other work that's on their plate. They need to have a conversation. So this examination of our needs, of what's behind the emotion, will often cause us to think about the situation completely differently,
Mhm.
right? See things from another perspective. Now, we have we're born with this ability to recognize what our emotions are telling us and what the underlying need is. And then we've been culturally conditioned. And for 2,600 years, starting the 6th century BCE, right? So it's been a way of interpreting emotions that's been with us for a long time. It's
Mhm.
incorrect, and it's kind of the superimposition over our innate way of interpreting our emotions. But this other way of interpreting our emotions as responses to what's happening to us or to the story we're telling ourselves about what's happening to us. Um, my experience is that for a given person, they interpret some of their emotions through the innate lens and some of their emotions through the culturally conditioned lens.
Mhm.
So when one of these emotions arise, they're in solve and evolve. When one of
Mhm.
these emotions arise, they fall into blame and complain. Okay. So when I'm working with a client, I will seek to identify what are the emotions that they fall into this victim, blame, and complain stance, and where is that impacting their life negatively. Okay. So if they are, if they're waking up at 3 in the morning and having a panic attack,
Mhm.
start with anxiety
Mhm.
because they're clearly misinterpreting that. If it's um, they're find themselves something happens and they kind of lose the thread and they're not being particularly productive at work, we'll work on frustration and achieving goals.
Mhm.
So I tend to take them one at a time
Mhm.
and work with them. When I first came up with this and I really wanted to test the theory and the methodology, I found three gentlemen, they all happen to be men, who had documented anger management issues to see if by getting them to understand that it's not the other person that's making them angry, it's the fact that they're not on track to assert a right of theirs that's
Hmm.
making them angry.
Hmm.
And it was fascinating. So for one of them, that understanding was enough
Hmm.
for them to disabuse themselves of their anger management issue.
Hmm.
For another, it turns out they had a life history where the only strategy they had for asserting their rights was to was violence, basically,
Hmm.
right? So they needed to learn other strategies for establishing what rights they had with other people and asserting them. That
Hmm.
took long. So,
What happened to the
um,
three?
so
There's three.
yes, there's a big domain
Mhm.
here, um, but each of the individual techniques is actually quite simple.
Okay. So from a coach, from a coach client standpoint perspective, you've seen and experienced pretty rapid change where you're able to pinpoint and help guide the client to see and like basically have a total perspective change. And you see the result is almost immediate, but not always. You're saying in some cases, if there needs to be a greater capability increase or building, it might take a little bit longer. Um, so that's with you as the expert, knowing what to look for and then guiding the client along. If I am a if I'm a coach and I want to be able to do that same thing for my clients, if I'm a leadership coach, if I'm a emotional wellness coach, if I want to do that same thing for my clients, is this something that you can teach me?
Totally, totally. And what's interesting about it is it's remedial. Like it's returning people to their naturally
Mm.
peak performance, highly adaptable, quick to learn state. So part of it is, a big part of it is that as coaches, um, what do we ultimately do for our clients? If our client is going to live a better life, it's going to be because they've changed their subconscious behavior.
Hmm. 100%.
Right? Okay, so you can have a call with them, they get the aha, they see this pattern, they see the way they behave, they make the mental note when they're in that situation to behave differently. Next time they're in that situation, they behave exactly the same way they did before.
Hmm.
Now they just very quickly realize that that's not what they wanted to do, right? Right? Which can be very frustrating for the client.
Hmm.
Right. So you've given them the kind of intellectual understanding
Hmm.
of what they're doing and what they would like to be doing differently, but you haven't updated their subconscious programming, right? They haven't updated their subconscious programming. So, and that subconscious programming is stored in these needs.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. Um, so one of the most important needs that all of us have is the need to protect our assets, starting with our body, right? Our family, our house, our job, our money, all these kinds of things. We feel a need to protect those assets, whatever it is that we're using to live our life. We want to protect those things. And
Hmm.
when our subconscious determines, hey, we're not on track to protect an asset, fear is the emotion that wakes us up, our conscious mind, up to the fact that we need to protect this asset better than we currently are protecting it, right? Um, so think about your life from the perspective of this need to protect assets. So the baby is born,
Hmm.
and there are two situations in which the baby will exhibit fear: loud noises and heights. Everything else is learned. So now that baby goes through life and they're constantly learning, oh, this is a situation in which I need to protect this asset.
Mm.
This is a situation I need to protect this other asset. Here's the strategy I'm going to use to protect that asset when that situation appears.
Mhm.
And here's what I'm going to watch for to know whether or not I'm on track to protect that asset.
Mhm.
All those things are learned. And this is what allows a human being to arrive and almost by osmosis come up to speed on the knowledge, the tools, the techniques, the technology, the social norms, the everything else that's part of that culture
Mhm.
because these needs are constantly learning where they can,
Mhm.
right? Okay. And sometimes we'll learn a strategy that worked with the bully in fifth grade at recess, but that strategy doesn't work so well, or that strategy could cost us our job when we're now a middle manager and we have a dispute with our boss. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so then being able to kind of get in there, analyze the programming of this need, and deciding what element do we need to change. Um, I'll give you I'll give you an example. Much of this programming we simply inherit from our parents and the other people around us, especially when we're young. Um, I gave a corporate workshop. It was a leadership team, and at the end of it, a woman came up to me and she said, "Do you mind if I ask how to apply this to uh, my personal life?" I said, "Sure." Um, this weekend, my husband of 22 years asked for a divorce.
Mm.
Oh, no, I'm really sorry. Why does he want a divorce? Well, he says I'm angry with him all the time. He doesn't like that. And I said, well, are you angry with him a lot? She's like, yeah, yeah, rarely a day goes by where I'm not really angry with him.
Mm.
And I said, well, what are you so angry about? Well, he does this and he does that and he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that. And I'm like, whoa, is that emotional victimhood or emotional responsibility? Well, if I'm attributing my anger to what he does or doesn't do, I guess I'm in victimhood. Like, yes. Okay, great.
Mhm.
So use what you learned in the class. What right are you not on track to assert with your husband? So she thinks about that. I can see the wheels turning.
Mhm.
Bing, the light bulb goes off. A second after the light bulb goes off, her cheeks flush with embarrassment. And I just wait. And she
Mhm.
says, well, my subconscious believes I have a right to expect him to anticipate my needs and provide me with what I want. Most important part, before I have to ask.
Mm.
And I said, okay, great. So you've identified the right. You're
Mhm.
struggling to meet with your husband. Now,
Mhm.
rights are social agreements. Would he agree you have this right? No, he would not. Well, then where did you get the belief that you had this right? And she said, well, my mom believes she had this right. And here's the kicker. My dad agreed, and they played this game.
Mm.
And I said,
Mhm.
okay, well, what are your options? Can you get your husband to play the game with you? No, no, no. He grew up in a different kind of family. That wasn't the way they did things. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I guess I have to drop my belief that I have this right.
Mm.
I said, great, you're on the right track. That's the right idea. But dropping something like that without having something to replace it with is extremely difficult. So if you don't have a right to expect him to do what you haven't even told him you want, but he can intuit, et cetera, et cetera, what right do you have in that moment when you're feeling angry? Well, I guess I have the right to ask him for what I want. So that sounds good. So what are you going to do? Well, I guess I'm going to go and the next time I feel angry, I'm going to pause, check in with myself. If that's the right I'm not on track to meet. I'm going to gently remind my subconscious that I don't have that right, but I do have the right to ask him for what I want. And
Mhm.
I said, so it's very important that the moment you have that thought, you ask him. You immediately put it into practice because it will be through that repetition that you retrain your subconscious as to what right you have in that situation.
Mhm.
And she's like, I got it. And I didn't think anything else
Mhm.
of it. 2 months later, I get an email from her. And it just says, thank you, exclamation point in the subject line. And she explains how for weeks afterwards, she'd be in a situation, she'd feel angry, she'd check in, she'd remind herself, she'd ask her husband for what she wanted.
Mhm.
And then around the 6th week, she realized that she had been asking her husband for what she wanted without ever going through that whole
Mm.
angry that he wasn't already doing it.
Mm.
That's behavior change.
Right.
She doesn't have to consciously think about it anymore,
Mhm.
right? That's success,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I
So there.
had a I had a 10-minute conversation with her.
Mhm.
She did the enormous, all this work
Yeah.
in all these instances. But, that surgery, so to speak, that
Mhm.
we had together in that conversation, um, led to her being in the gym, building that new muscle.
Yeah.
And so then she explains this, and then she said, I'm writing you with tears in my eyes because my husband just told me he no longer wants a divorce.
Mm. Yeah. What a
Right?
great
That's
example.
satisfying for a coach, right? That's
Yeah,
satisfying.
absolutely. And so I want to track back to the question, which was, hey, is this accessible and how long does it take? And what I'm hearing you say is it is accessible. You can train it pretty fast, and it's not without work because we're doing subconscious, right, programming. So it's not like, oh, she gets it, and all of a sudden she doesn't get angry. I think what you're describing is her subconscious programming was still getting angry, but she had a new path now. She had a new opportunity to say, well, no, we're not going to do that because there's a self-identified new way of like, no, that's actually not, we didn't have the script right. We're going to follow this other script first. And that had to be done in enough, with enough reps to build the muscle to say, oh, this is just what I do. And it created a whole new beginning.
Mhm.
And that is long-term change.
Yes. Yes. And as people develop more and more facility on an
Hmm.
emotion by emotion basis of
Yeah.
this, they become more and more adaptable,
Hmm.
right? Their ability to figure out what new neural pathways they want to embody and
Yeah.
then embody that, the speed at which they do that keeps going up,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And where, the vision, so to speak, is if you're consistently interpreting all of your emotions in terms of your needs, and we've been talking about negative emotions, but there's
Yeah.
also um, important things about the positive emotions. But if we just stay with that,
Yeah.
then um, you're just flowing through life like a force of nature, right? Where the conscious mind's job is to respond to the subconscious needs that need its attention
Yeah.
and continually optimize the performance of the subconscious,
Hmm.
right? So every negative emotion becomes an opportunity to upgrade your subconscious programming. Every positive emotion becomes an opportunity to strengthen the subconscious programming that's working for you,
Hmm.
right? And this accelerates the person's development.
Hmm.
So I mostly work with leaders and leadership coaches, and this accelerating their development as a leader, right? that's extremely valuable to them. And you can, and what's nice about this work is you're always dealing with something that's real and in the present,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It's not like, okay, learn
Right.
this the next time you're in this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
No.
not like one of these base skills or a workshop that you take that one day you'll need. Like every time you facilitate this, either in a coaching situation or a leadership situ, their context will always be perfectly timed for it to be a match for this work because they're humans in an interpersonal environment. So it feels like it would always be relevant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've chosen almost immediately in learning your work, it was relevant for a group I was working with as well. And I've had two sessions with them now, two group sessions, and the change already has been pretty significant. Um, it's not complete, like the reps aren't done for sure, but the changes I've seen in the relationship between directs and the reports has been tremendously uplifting. And it's changed my one-on-one conversations with them now as well, where it's less of a conversation when we come and we're doing our one-on-ones where it's we're actually already at the stage, and this is only two group sessions where they're not coming and saying, I feel this negative thing. Like, and sometimes as a coach, it feels like they're just dumping all the stuff. They're not doing that anymore because they know that I'm going to show them a worksheet with the needs on it. So they do that prep work. And a lot of the times they're through it already and just celebrating the success with me. They're saying, hey, let me tell you about this thing that happened. I was frustrated with this. And then I thought, right, I thought about it, but then really felt into it with the worksheets that you've created. And then they're like, and so I did this. And the level of that they're resolving their and meeting their own needs is quite remarkable in a pretty short amount of time. So I asked you those questions so others could hear it. And also just to celebrate in a really proven capacity that the precision that you've put this together in a real practical like manner. I'm a big fan. It's making a difference.
Thank you for
So
the
we
feedback.
we have an invitation. So if you're listening to this conversation and you have a desire to respond, so as an individual, you have a desire to dig into this a little bit more and understand, well, how would I like change my own subconscious programming to respond in better ways that improve my life? If that's you, then this workshop that we're about to talk to is definitely for you. If you are a coach, a leadership coach, I would say even like if you're working in HR and you're like deciding what type of work to bring into your organization to help improve your culture, I really, really recommend that you come to a workshop that you're going to be hosting with me, Charles, this Friday, where you're going to really open up this body of work with some actual examples, show some of the worksheets that you use to actually help people resolve conflict, resolve or respond to these negative emotions. So I want to give a call out if you're a coach, if you're a person interested in the evolution of how you respond, that you're invited. It's a free workshop, and Charles is going to spend an hour and a half sharing some of his wisdom. So the invite will be in the notes down below. As we close, Charles, anything that you feel compelled to add on why one
Yes.
person? Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
For those of you that are coming to the workshop, um, arrive with some situation in mind. So if you're a leader, what's a leadership challenge that you're not sure you're up for and it's like coming up? Um, if you have an interpersonal issue with someone else, if you're like super conflicted within yourself about something, any kind of challenging situation where you have some level of emotional distress, bring that to the workshop. Now, I'm going to be doing a demo with one of you where I will walk you through the process. And what's really cool about this process is you don't need to tell me anything about your situation. I can literally, we can just bypass the narrative entirely
Yeah.
and just, I'll lead you through something that has you work with your subconscious in such a way that become crystal clear what's the most important need for you to meet in this situation. And then I'll show you three options for resolving the negative emotion that that need is generating. And then I'll just ask you to choose the option that's most in harmony with your values. And generally, um, within 15 to 20 minutes of this demo, you will have a newfound clarity and you will feel differently about your situation. You'll be in a much more self-empowered mindset with regard to what's going on. And for those of you that aren't doing the demo, that aren't pretending to be my client, um, you can follow along. And as I'm speaking to the client, but your subconscious is listening, there'll be little pings of recognition. Like you'll make some progress on your issue
Mm.
just as we walk through this process. And those of you who come, you'll actually walk away with a little job aid on how to do that process.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so the more the merrier. Um, and like it's a mini workshop. This is not
Yeah.
going to be, there'll be a little bit of lecture to explain some of the concepts and stuff, but we're really going to get in there. It's going to be experiential. This will be an hour and a half that you do not regret spending. You'll be
Yeah.
in better shape after this hour and a half.
I'm so excited to host it, and I 100% am behind that sentiment. Uh, and it's the type of thing when you see it, you'll believe it, and it's kind of you can kind of get up here in the cognitive realm, but when we walk through it in the way that I know you know how, it's gonna make a pretty big difference. So
You will feel this technique in your body.
yeah, yeah. Okay, fantastic. Charles, thank you so much. I will see you on Friday for the workshop. And again, I just appreciate what you're bringing to this industry of change and transformation. It's really tremendous stuff.
You're very welcome. I appreciated the opportunity, and I will see you all on Friday.
Awesome. Take care.